Hi everyone, Josh with Talk About Trek, and we are back again with a TNG numbered novel. This time we're on number 16, Contamination. So it's the new novel by John Vornholt. Now this is the second novel by John Vornholt I've read. He did write, I think number 5. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But anyway, he wrote Masks, which was another really fun TNG book, and I do remember really enjoying it. I think I made a video about it, so go back and check that out. But this one is Contamination, and it says here on the cover, a murderer is on the loose. Probably that guy in the mask, they would have you think. So, from the back cover, Star Trek The Next Generation, Contamination. The Enterprise crew is stunned when famed scientist Lynn Costa is murdered in one of the ship's science labs. She and her husband Emil were known as science's greatest ongoing collaboration, and together they had achieved the Federation's highest honors for their achievements in scientific research. Determined to see the culprit brought to justice, Captain Picard assigns Lieutenant Worf and Counselor Deanna Troi to the case. Their routine investigation of the ship's science lab soon reveals a dangerous web of deceit, betrayal, and madness. Now Worf and Troi find themselves struggling against a ruthless assassin set on revenge, for whom murder is only the beginning. Sounds pretty good, right? And it was pretty good, actually. So we'll dive right in, and I'll try not to rant too much so that this goes on for forever and forever and forever. But, man, there's kind of a lot to dig into. So like the back cover says there, the book starts off with a very distraught Lynn Costa, who's a very well-known scientist who's in a session with Counselor Troi, and she's clearly scared. She wants to get off the ship, and Counselor Troi is not having any luck to calm her down. So she suggests that maybe they should have a shore leave at the upcoming starbase that they're visiting. So the point of their mission currently is they're traveling to a new starbase which is opening called Kalen Rock. I hope I got that right. Kalen Rock, anyway. We're going to go with that. And this is in the Creole section of space. And the Creole are an alien that were previously, I think, in another novel, maybe like Strike Zone, I think it was called. But they're not someone who's shown up on screen. But it's in Creole space, and it's a new starbase built onto an asteroid. So she's recommended that they're going to go have some shore leave there. And I'm already ranting too much. This is just chapter 1. The session ends well, and she leaves, seemingly calmed down. Deanna goes off to bed and has a terrible dream of this lab accident that goes off and this gas coming out of this pod that gets her. Wakes up the next day and finds out that Lynn Costa is dead as a result of a lab accident. Dun dun dun. So somehow she dreamed this, and it's not touched on too much in the rest of the book, which I thought was kind of weird. But anyway, so there's a lab accident, and they have to investigate it. So they start now introducing the other side characters who are going to become the suspects in this little kind of murder mystery that they're going to put on here for us on the Enterprise. So they go down to the scientific section of the Enterprise, which is like this whole big deck with all these different labs and everything. And that's kind of one of the cool parts of this book, is getting to see not just like the officers of the Enterprise, but just the scientists and the people who are there to do experiments and to advance, technology and that kind of stuff. So here's where they introduce, Picard puts Worf and Troi on the case to investigate and make sure, was it an accident? Was there something more? So the first thing they do is they visit down to the lab. And that's where they start meeting these other characters. The director of the lab is Dr. Malou, and he's a full-blooded betazoid, and he's the one that's in charge of the full scientific department. Also, there's a Vulcan scientist named Seduk who was working with Emil and Lynn, and then there is a kind of a lab assistant named Shanna Russell. And then there was also an Antaran, a huge Antaran named Dr. Grastow. So this is kind of your cast of characters for the book here, your suspects potentially in what's going to be going on. So they do visit down to the lab, and they get into the actual room where the accident happened, and they're able to deduce that basically this couldn't happen by accident. This pod is too well designed or whatever. It was made to look like maybe an accident, but someone definitely did murder her. Also, they do find a small blue vial, like right there on the scene, like dun dun dun, like right here's your little perfect clue. So now that they think that murder is definitely something that could be a possibility, they begin their interrogation. So they kind of go through all the suspects. The Vulcan Seduk has a possible motive for getting rid of them, so that he could be in charge of this department. It seems that Dr. Grastow is just basically worships the ground they walk on, so he's not much of a suspect. And Emil is just pushing, or Dr. Malou, who is the head doctor in charge, he's just pushing to close down the investigation. So he kind of right away seems a little suspect. And they're kind of throwing a little bit of shade on Seduk as well to maybe make it seem like he is also a possible suspect. So now we're getting into about Chapter 5. They go to interrogate Shanna Russell, and she just kind of falls apart in tears, and they're not able to get anything out of her, so they move on after that. Troi is awakened in the night by a very angry Dr. Malou, who basically, again, wants things just to stop. He wants to go back to doing his scientific work, and wants to just classify this as an accident and move on. So, again, very, very, very suspicious. So... at this point, they actually enlist a third partner in crime here, Troi and Worf, to help them figure out what's going on. They've learned that Wesley Crusher was kind of a good friend to Emil Costa, so they engage him to follow up with Emil and get any information out of him that they can. You'll see if possibly he was one of the, if he did something. So he goes to talk to Emil Costa, and he is basically scared as well, just like his wife was. So he doesn't come off like a suspect at all, and you can kind of tell that he's in the same boat as she was. There's something going on that is scaring them. So now we're in about Chapter 7 here. Troi is doing her interrogation of Seduk, who's actually kind of flirting with her a little bit too. So it's kind of a little bit of weird stuff there. But they get to a point where it's basically Emil has requested this shore leave, so he only has 4 more hours before he is to go, and Worf thinks that he is one of the suspects and he doesn't want him to go. So now this is getting down to like the clutch hour. He's got a little bit of time left to prove that something is going on, but who's the one that actually gets into trouble and kind of advances the story? Of course, Wesley Crusher. So Wesley Crusher is kind of following Emil, kind of sees him doing some suspicious things, and gets himself into a little bit of trouble. He gets captured by the large intern, Dr. Graskow, and is kind of held captive while Emil goes off to some secret... Emil Costa goes off to a secret meeting with Dr. Malou. He takes a phaser with him as well. Wesley manages to escape, and he contacts O'Brien, gets a site transport right to the pod room, and is kind of hiding in there so he can conveniently sit and watch as the whole plot is revealed for you. So there in Chapter 8 here is when the whole mystery gets revealed. And what it is that Lynn and Emil Costa, who are microbiologists, discovered a very dangerous microbacteria, and they just basically decided it was so dangerous, its use as a weapon was just too dangerous. They had to hide their discovery, but before that they did that, they revealed it to this Dr. Malou, and this Dr. Malou, he wanted to sell it to people, and at first they were going to go for it, then they changed their mind, and boom, boom, boom. That's like the whole thing. That's the whole crime right there. So now this Dr. Malou is confronting him in the pod room, basically saying, you were gonna go through with this before to make the money, and you didn't. It's time to go through with it. And then Wesley, of course, over in the corner, he gasps, and he's heard, and immediately they just go grab him up, and they shove him in one of the pods, and they leave. So that's kind of your little danger moment there. Now, so it kind of leaves there. In the meantime, the Creel arrive on the ship. Now the Creel are coming to the station, or the ship too, and they are going to basically all ride in the same shuttle together. Kind of a convoluted story as to why, because they didn't have transporter tech yet, so the Enterprise didn't want to beam them and make them feel bad, so they're all just going to ride in a shuttle together. which turns out not to be so good in the future here. But O'Brien, after beaming Wes into the pod room, decides to report it to Worf, as Wes did ask him to do that. Worf then goes to examine the pod room, runs in there as quick as he can. In running in there, he gets hit by a phaser once, twice, and is stunned and knocked cold. So Worf is out on the ground. Saduk actually goes and is able to get Wes out of the pod, and said he did it at Emil's request. So as Emil was leaving, he said, go get Wes out of the pod, he's still in there, kind of proving that maybe he's not quite the bad guy, even though he is still doing some bad things with this guy. And man, I'm ranting. We're already at 10 minutes, and I'm not even halfway through this thing. I'm going to try to rant less, and just, we're going to move through the story here a little bit more, because this is actually where things kind of pick up. So Worf is knocked out, and they find Dr. Malou's body. He's been blasted by a phaser at point-blank range, and he's kind of like blown open. And of course, the suspect is Emil. But Emil has gotten onto the shuttlecraft, and the shuttlecraft is already launched on its way to the station in the meantime. So as soon as Worf wakes up and sees what's happened, he puts two and two together, and he says, puts out a security alert for Emil. And then on the shuttlecraft, he hears this, and he's still got this phaser on him, and he kind of loses his mind. And it's like, I'm not going back there for nothing. He blasts all the controls of the shuttle, and the shuttle loses control, and kind of they lose all their power, all their communications, navigation, everything. Data, Picard, Riker, and the Creel group are all on the shuttle together. Data is able to do a little bit of work to restore a little bit of navigation, and they're able to get themselves into a position within the asteroid belt where they're shielded somewhat, but they are in a lot of trouble. So they rig up a distress signal at the expense of life support and kind of everything else, and just are basically hoping against hope to be rescued by the Enterprise. And of course that's what happens. The end of chapter 10, you have Geordi here on the bridge of the Enterprise in charge. They detect the beacon, and then a nice little scene, they move the Enterprise in just close enough and beam everyone out right at the last second, right before the shuttle is impacted by a bunch of asteroids and blows up. So that's the big action scene of this whole book. And it was a good book, and it was very intriguing and kept me going, but that shuttle scene was the whole thing. Other than that, you've just got little bits of murder and intrigue and mystery and that kind of stuff. So now that portion is over, they've got Emil in custody. It's time to officially open up the space station, which is what they came there to do. So they do have a little party where they nix the shuttles this time. They beam everybody down to the party, and they decide they're going to have a trial for this guy, and they're going to hold it there at the station as kind of per the custom of Starfleet, I guess. And they bring in the judge advocate general of the sector there to be the judge of it. And then they appoint Worf to be the prosecutor, and Data will be the defense of Emil at the recommendation of Wesley Crusher. So now what you've got started as a murder mystery is turned into a couple chapters of a neat little courtroom drama. So they have kind of everyone moving into courtroom mode. Wes has moved into isolation to prepare his statement on what he saw and what happened. Troi is back still investigating things on the ship, thinking maybe there's still a little bit more to figure out, and she goes to Dr. Malou's office because she thinks that there's something more. And in doing that, she can tell that there's definitely something more going on. The office is open. Someone tries to come in there while she's in there. So something more is going on, and she's feeling kind of more and more apprehensive about it. Chapter 14, court case begins. So Worf lays out his opening argument. So you got this neat little chapter where you got Worf and Data kind of going back and forth, laying out the case for and against him, Emil Costa, murdering Dr. Karn Milou. So in the meantime, Troi has found a hidden file in Dr. Malou's office, but it is encoded with some sort of secret Betazoid meditation tech, and she can't get past it right now. So she's got to figure out a way to do that so she can figure out the final clues of this mystery. So they take it back to the court. So they're kind of going back and forth. You got your little Star Trek Law and Order here. West gets up and he gives his statement about what he saw, but still kind of states, I still don't think that this guy is a murderer in the end. They put Dr. Costa on the stand, who goes through all the things that he did do wrong about finding this thing and then hiding his findings and then thinking about selling the thing, but still insists that he did not kill anybody. So, all in all, it's making him look fairly innocent. Now, I'm going to go back all the way to the beginning soon. So, get ready for that. Now, Troi has this little isolinear chip, but she can't decipher it, and she needs to figure out a way to do it. So she takes a walk on the holodeck and recites some Bajoran poetry, and kind of gets inside of her mind and this guy's mind to figure out a way to read his secret encrypted files. So, yeah, it's kind of silly, but it works in the end. In the end, she does figure it out, and she gets like 2 or 3 different phrases from the file. But just as she gets those phrases off and is getting ready to kind of do more with them, she is attacked as well. And she goes to get a sandwich from her replicator, and it gasses her, and she is nearly killed. But, and what is kind of an ingenious part of here, well, I like this part at least, of the engineering of the Enterprise, as she's passing out, she taps her communicator and says, emergency, medical emergency, and the computer is able to quickly beam her directly to Dr. Crusher, and because of that, she is saved, just in the nick of time. So she ends up getting a hold of Worf and gives Worf the final kind of bits of clues. And then Worf is back on the Enterprise now. They kind of held a recess in the court and trying to figure out, now they know that there's they don't have the murderer. He or she is still on the Enterprise. So Worf is now in Dr. Mlu's office. Saduk comes in, and people are thinking like, is he coming in to murder Worf now? No. He comes in to help him solve. So Worf goes over the clues with him, and the two of them working together are able to figure out who the real culprit is. And it turns out it's actually Shanna Russell, and her real name was Jasmine. And earlier in the book, they kind of dropped like little tidbits here and there, but earlier in the book they dropped a little tidbit about an earlier scientist who accused Lynn and Emil of plagiarizing her work, and basically they ruined her. And this Jasmine turns out is their daughter, and she was hired by Dr. Mlu to come in and sabotage them because he wanted to get that dirty microbe. So that was it. So in figuring that out, Worf goes back to his office, and he's sitting there at his computer. He's kind of getting his final thing and putting his final thoughts together. It's like, oh my God, Jasmine is Shanna Russell. And while he's sitting there looking at his computer, she sneaks out of the closet behind him with a phaser, and it's like, stand up, Mr. Worf. We're going to go get a shuttlecraft. So this is when the book kind of gets a little silly, but it's still kind of fun. Like I said, there's not a lot of action in this book, so I think the way they ended it is it's right in line. It was fun, and it made me laugh. So she escorts Mr. Worf to the shuttlecraft, to the turbo lift en route to the shuttlecrafts. In the very beginning of this book, Worf was upset with the reaction time of the shuttlecrafts, or I'm going to say shuttlecraft again, of the turbo lifts in an emergency. So he had asked Geordi to please see about speeding them up. So Geordi gave it a try, and he said, if you ever want to try it, Worf, all you have to do is say, emergency speed, or whatever the code word was. And the shuttlecraft would, I said it three times. The turbo lift would speed up. So they get into the turbo lift. Shanna and Worf do. Jasmine and Worf do. That's her real name. And she's still got the phaser on him. And he says, all right, we're going to the shuttle bay, and he sets it there. And then real quick he says, emergency speed. And then the thing just goes whoop, and just the bottom drops out, and she flies up and hits her head on the ceiling. He knew it was going to happen, so he kind of braced himself, but he still flies up too. They both land on the ground, and they're struggling for the phaser, and he just punches her in the face. And that's the end of your conflict for the book. She's out, and that's it. The villain is foiled. In the end, kind of a happy ending for everybody. Dr. Costa, who did screw up a lot, gets a chance to, instead of being arrested, he lives on that asteroid for 5 years, and he's going to teach the Creel about his biofilter technology, which is going to help them kind of more efficiently develop their own transporter technology. So he's going to help them kind of move up in the world, and he's going to do that for 5 years. It's kind of like a house arrest thing, just because of all the trouble that he caused, especially all the ridiculousness on that shuttlecraft. Worf and Troi do a good job, and at the end, that's exactly what Picard tells him. That's how the book actually ends. He says, "Mr. Worf, well done." And that's it. So, Contamination, final thoughts. Well, this is a fun little mystery that then turns into a fun little courtroom drama that gives you like a 2 or 3 little action set pieces in it to kind of keep the beat moving along. One thing that I really like about this book is it doesn't have some kind of weird B story that doesn't tie in or anything like that. It's all just the mystery from start to finish. So you get your basic Worf and Troi story. They don't deviate too much from that. They throw in a couple of side characters here and there. So it really is just well paced. I mean, you go from your mystery, you get your shuttle scene, you get your courtroom scene, all while you have different red herrings for who's the suspect, who isn't the suspect, what's really going on here. I think that the end was a good twist. I liked how the hints were dropped throughout the book, but you couldn't really pick them up, and then you could pick them up at the end. So banana splits are a really good dessert. I didn't talk about that, but that's in there as well. Increased turbolift speed saves the day. That's always good. A couple of things I didn't like, though. It seems like if someone is on the Enterprise and they shoot someone with a phaser, that would be detected by some kind of computer. And that didn't happen, so that seemed kind of weird to me that could happen. And even the fact that people could somehow replicate phasers, which is something that they were doing here, seemed kind of out of control. But man, all in all, I really had a good time with this book. Started it on the 6th of June, finished it on the 10th of June. So that's 4 days for a nice little, what do we got, 271 page book of fun. So if you're looking for a Worf and Troi adventure, pick up Contamination by John Vornholt. I don't know where we're going to go after this, but I think we're going to go away from TNG and maybe do something totally different. I do know I'm going to a flea market tomorrow, so maybe that will kind of, maybe fate will jump in and kind of guide my hand and see where I'm going to go next in this wonderful Star Trek adventure. So anyway, everyone, thank you so much for watching as always. Live long and prosper, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye.